In this week's episode of Strange But True Stories, I'm going to investigate what authorities already know about D.B Cooper and the hijacking he perpetrated, and whether new evidence can finally solve the D.B Cooper mystery. Did he go on to live an anonymous life, living on the money he stole, or did his parachute fail during his descent, killing him on impact? On the eve of Thanksgiving, November 24th, 1971, a middle-aged man carrying a black briefcase approached the flight counter of Northwest Orient Airlines at Portland International Airport. He identified himself as Dan Cooper and used some cash to purchase a one-way ticket on Flight 305, which was a 30-minute trip to Seattle. When Cooper boarded the aircraft, which was a Boeing 727-100, he took seat 18C at the rear of the plane, ordered himself a bourbon and soda and lit a cigarette. The plane took off at approximately 2:50 p.m. and once in the air, he handed a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner, who assumed it was just a lonely businessman's phone number and put it in her purse. He looked at her and said, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb." After she read the note, Cooper demanded that she sit next to him and took the ransom note back off of her. He probably realised it could have been used as evidence to trace him, although she was able to recall that the note was written in neat handwriting, all in capital letters. She asked to see the bomb and he opened his briefcase. Sure enough, there was a bomb in there, which consisted of 8 red cylinders, 2 wires coated with red insulation and a large cylindrical battery. After closing his briefcase, he conveyed his ransom demands. He wanted $200,000 in negotiable American currency, 4 parachutes, 2 main and 2 reserves, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane after they land. Schaffner advised the pilot and co-pilot of the hijacking and informed them of his demands. They then contacted Seattle-Tacoma Air Traffic Control, who in turn informed federal and local authorities. On her return to the cabin, she noted that he was now wearing sunglasses. The pilots informed the rest of the passengers that the landing was delayed due to a technical malfunction in order not to alarm them. They circled for several hours to give the FBI enough time to get the money together and organise Cooper's demands. The plane landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport at 5:39 p.m. He informed the pilot to taxi the aircraft to an isolated, brightly lit area of the tarmac and ordered the cabin crew to close all window shades to deter police snipers. Al Lee, who was Northwest Orient's operations manager, delivered the money and parachutes in a knapsack to flight attendant Tina MacLeod via the plane's rear stairs. Once the delivery was completed, Cooper ordered all passengers, Schaffner and senior flight attendant Alice Hancock to leave the plane. While the tanker was refueling the aircraft, Cooper outlined his flight plan to the cockpit crew, which was a southeast course toward Mexico City at the minimum airspeed possible without stalling the aircraft, which was approximately 120 miles an hour at a maximum of 10,000 feet altitude. He further specified that the landing gear remain deployed in the takeoff landing position, the wing flaps be lowered by 15 degrees, and the cabin remain unpressurized. The co-pilot informed Cooper that the aircraft's range was limited to 1,000 miles under the specified flight configuration, which meant that a second refueling would be necessary before entering Mexico. Cooper and the crew discussed options and agreed on Reno, Nevada as the refueling stop. Cooper demanded the plane take off with the rear exit door open and the staircase extended, which Northwest's Home Office objected to on the grounds that it would be unsafe to do so. Cooper countered that it was safe, but did not argue the point and promised only to lower the staircase when they were airborne. At 7:40 p.m, the Boeing 727 took off with only 5 people on board: Cooper, pilot Scott, flight attendant MacLeod, the co-pilot and flight engineer H.E. Anderson. 2 F-106 fighter aircraft were scrambled from nearby McCoy Air Force Base and followed behind the airliner, one above and one below, making sure they were out of Cooper's view. After takeoff, Cooper told MacLeod to join the rest of the crew in the cockpit and remain there with the door closed. As she complied, MacLeod observed Cooper tying something around his waist. Then a warning light flashed in the cockpit, indicating that the aft air stair apparatus had been activated. The crew's offer of assistance via the aircraft's intercom system was curtly refused. The crew soon noticed a subjective change of air pressure, indicating that the aft door was open. At 8:13 p.m, the aircraft's tail section sustained a sudden upward movement, significant enough to require trimming to bring the plane back to level flying. The pilots managed to land the plane even with the stairwell activated at 10:15 p.m. at Reno Airport. FBI agents, state troopers, sheriff's deputies and Reno police surrounded the jet, as it had not yet been determined with certainty that Cooper was no longer aboard, but an armed search quickly confirmed that he was gone. The only evidence left behind was his black clip-on tie and mother-of-pearl tie clip. The FBI found dozens of latent fingerprints on board the jet, but it was impossible to identify anyone from them as there were so many mixed together. Even with the military's assistance, authorities were not able to find him anywhere in the local or greater vicinity of his estimated parachute jump, which was around the southernmost outreach of Mount St. Helens. Even with the discovery of a placard with instructions for lowering the aft stairs of a 727 in 1978 and several packets of $20 bills from the actual ransom money in 1980, the FBI were and are still unable to identify or trace Cooper. Several suspects were put forward, but only 2 of these seem to really stand out from the rest. They are Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. and Robert Rackstraw. On April 7, 1972, Richard McCoy staged the best known of the so-called copycat hijackings. He boarded United Airlines Flight 855, a Boeing 727 with aft stairs in Denver, and brandishing what later proved to be a paperweight resembling a hand grenade and an unloaded handgun. He demanded 4 parachutes and $500,000. After the delivery of the money and parachutes at San Francisco International Airport, McCoy ordered the aircraft back into the sky and bailed out over Provo, Utah, leaving behind his handwritten hijacking instructions and his fingerprints on a magazine he had been reading. He was arrested on April 9th with the ransom cash in his possession, and after trial and conviction received a massive 45-year sentence. 2 years later, he escaped from Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary with several accomplices by crashing a garbage truck through the main gate. Tracked down 3 months later in Virginia Beach, McCoy was killed in a shootout with FBI agents. Robert Wesley Rackstraw is a retired pilot and ex-convict who served on an army helicopter and other units during the Vietnam War. He came to the attention of the Cooper Task Force in February of 1978 after he was arrested in Iran and deported to the US to face explosive possession and check-kiting charges. Several months later, while released on bail, Rackstraw attempted to fake his own death by radioing a false Mayday call and telling controllers that he was bailing out of a rented plane over Monterey Bay. Police later arrested him in Fullerton on an additional charge of forging federal pilot certificates. The plane he claimed to have ditched was found, repainted, and put in a nearby hangar. Investigators noted his physical resemblance to Cooper composite sketches, although he was only 28 in 1971. The fact that he had military parachute training and a criminal record, but eliminated him as a suspect in 1979 after no direct evidence of his involvement could be found. However, in 2016, Rackstraw re-emerged as a suspect in a History Channel program and a book. On September 8, 2016, Thomas J. Colbert, an author of the book The Last Master Outlaw, filed a lawsuit to compel the FBI to release its Cooper case file under the Freedom of Information Act. The suit alleges that the FBI suspended active investigation of the Cooper case in order to undermine the theory that Rackstraw is D.B Cooper, so as to prevent embarrassment for the Bureau's failure to develop evidence sufficient to prosecute him for the crime. In January of 2018, a small cold case documentary team reported that they had obtained a letter originally written in December of 1971 with numerous numbers and letters written on it. The team, led by Tom and Donna Colbert, says that the codes were deciphered and matched to 3 units that Rackstraw was a part of while in the army, and the FBI refused to acknowledge the findings because it would have to admit that amateur sleuths had cracked a case that the Bureau couldn't. Although Richard McCoy carried out a similar hijacking and seemed to have the skills required to parachute out of an aircraft, there are some things that make me conclude that he is not D.B Cooper. He was far too clumsy for a start, leaving behind the ransom letter and magazine he was reading with fingerprints on them. The real Cooper seemed cool, calm and collected, and did not brandish a pretend weapon. He simply showed them his bomb, which was all he needed to get what he wanted. McCoy sounds like a bit of a buffoon if you ask me, and was quite easily apprehended, ending up being shot to death in a shootout with FBI agents. Doesn't really sound like a criminal mastermind to me. Then we move on to Robert Rackstraw, who drew my attention from the moment I started to investigate this whole mystery. Rackstraw has training as a pilot and served on a helicopter and other units during the Vietnam War. He would have had plenty of practice with parachute jumping, and his knowledge of planes seems to fit in with the exact configurations that Cooper gave to the pilots of Flight 305. Only someone with long-term experience would be able to provide such accurate instructions for the configuration needed to safely parachute from a commercial airliner. He was also charged with possession of explosives, which indicates he may have knowledge of making bombs. Then there is new evidence that emerged in January of this year from Tom and Donna Colbert, who have deciphered codes from a letter written in 1971 that linked to 3 units that Rackstraw was part of during the war. Now, this isn't absolute concrete evidence. It may just be circumstantial, but it's one of the best leads so far, which the FBI continue not to acknowledge or investigate. Rackstraw's attorney asserts that the new evidence and inquiry are absurd and the stupidest thing they have ever heard. The FBI believe that Cooper did not survive the fall, due to the weather conditions and extreme cold, which was minus 57 degrees at the time of his jump. They also noted that the main chute he went with was an older one, despite there being a new, more technically superior one in the set. The reserve parachute he chose out of a possible 2 that they supplied was one that was designed for testing and would not have opened during his descent. For these reasons, they say, proves he was not an experienced skydiver and would have almost certainly died. My conclusion is that Rackstraw is so far the only suspect that seems to fit all the requirements that would be needed to carry out the hijacking. He had the pilot experience and knowledge of planes, he would have had training with parachutes in the army, and he was in possession of explosives when he was arrested in Iran. I'm no expert in criminal profiling, but so far he has ticked a lot of boxes. The fact that he served in the army may have also been the reason he was able to execute the plan so well and survive the weather and terrain he landed in. He was able to conduct himself in a calm and collected manner despite the intense situation. Most ordinary folk would have been very nervous, drawing attention to themselves. The flight attendants did note at the time that he was not nervous at all and seemed very calm. So, was the FBI right all along? Did his chute fail during his jump, killing him on impact? Or did Robert Rackstraw conduct the greatest unsolved hijacking the world has ever known? Perhaps we will never know who he really is, but I believe my conclusion about Rackstraw is both sound and logical, because his background and skills would have given him the ability to conduct such a crime. Make sure to leave a comment with your thoughts and conclusions, as I'd love to hear who you think is the real suspect. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you're new to my channel, why not subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. Thanks for watching.